internationally, the more you actually get bigger returns. So actually it's an interesting point you say, Nikki, because I think quite a lot of people quite rightly identify that in terms of cuts in public spending in our country, we've done a lot of the easy stuff, and actually doing any more does become progressively more difficult, which is, for instance, why I just simply don't believe for 1 minute the ludicrous Conservative claim that they're just going to gouge £10 billion out of welfare without telling any vulnerable family
Tell
in
us
the
the
country.
practical measures. Let's talk about you.
Let me give you one.
£10 billion, tax avoidance, tax evasion.
Let me give you one.
It's a lot of money.
Let me give you one. We have on the statute book, in law, something called the General Anti-Abuse Law. So that now by law you cannot abuse the tax code, you cannot abuse the tax rules that are in place. We would go further and introduce a general anti-avoidance rule. As you know, tax avoidance can technically be legally okay. Evasion is the illegal bit. So the evasion bit is just a simple question of extending the long arm of the law internationally.
Avoidance is playing by the rules.
No, what we're saying under our general anti-avoidance law would be that if you are basically manipulating your tax arrangements, even if it's strictly speaking within the remit of the rules, but you're doing so for the sole purpose of avoiding the tax.
How do you prove that?
But of course you can.
The situation here is the UK cannot do it on its own.
Exactly.
It has to have a collaboration between many different countries, because it then means that if the UK has one system and other countries don't, they'll just move their operation abroad.
Dominic, I want to explore this as much. I'm sure audience do as well.
Surely a way of doing it is, I mean, majority of us are pay-as-you-earn people, so we have to pay tax at source, and it's taken from us before we even see it. Can you not do that for everybody?
Well, PAYE for everybody.
But Dominic, this is where
Frank, you didn't like that, did you?
No, I think it's great. I think it's brilliant.
Oh, you do like it? Okay. Yeah. Who wants PAYE for everybody? Put your. My goodness me.
And the trick is, as David
Royce, you think that we should radically change the way everyone's paid, and that would clamp down on it. So
definitely, if it means that we
PAYE for Paul McCartney. There we are. How are we going to?
Why not?
How are we going to get that one
Why
to
are
work?
these individuals any different to us, the people that do have to pay tax every month when we get our pay packet? It shouldn't be any different for them.
Anyone else on this particular issue of tax avoidance and Jana?
The question I wanted to ask is, you're talking about people and tax avoidance, but we have huge global corporations who for years and years and years have evaded paying tax in UK. So when are you going to introduce legislation to stop them doing that?
But this is David's point, and this is I think the nub of the matter, because so much of tax avoidance and particularly evasion is now a sort of international industry where there are can I just try and finish here? There are numerous jurisdictions where it is very, very easy for people to squirrel away money, to arbitrage their financial arrangements such that they don't pay tax in their home markets. You can only close these loopholes through international cooperation.
I'm more talking about loopholes like Google not paying any tax, Amazon paying very little tax or no tax in UK.
Yes, exactly.
So I'm talking about big corporations, and it's not to do with international community. Well, it is to an extent, but it's UK law that allows them to exploit the tax loopholes.
Yeah.
It's our legislation that allows them to do that. Change the law, stop them doing it, make it illegal.
No, I'm afraid it is about international cooperation, because particularly these very large international operations can at the switch of a button, change their financial arrangements. So, can I just try and provide you with an answer, Jana? The OECD, this club of developed economies in Paris, has been asked by us and other governments to come up with a whole range of new rules and indeed laws, some of which would have to be adopted as international treaties, some of which would have to be adopted as national laws, such that we don't provide any further hiding places to either individuals or corporate entities who are deliberately trying to play cat and mouse with national tax jurisdictions. In my view, that work is finally starting to bear fruit, and that is why I am as optimistic as I am that we can recoup a lot more money in exactly the same way that we have over the last 5 years.
Well, I want to move on to the NHS. Who might have something to say about the NHS? Put your hand up. Just one line. How do you prove intent? How do you prove somebody's intention if they're playing by the law, but you suspect that they're only doing it for tax purposes and not a genuine reason?
But the HMRC does this already. So as you'll hear from lots of people who complain about the HMRC crawling over the books of large or small.
On a smaller scale, if somebody's a freelancer and employs their wife, for example, so they can knock off a bit of tax, on a freelance basis, how do you prove that their wife is not doing paperwork and a vital part of the administration?
Well, that's exactly what the HMRC does. It's exactly what the tax authorities do already. They constantly, and I often get complaints, not least as a constituency MP, that from local businesses saying, why are we being asked to, why are they crawling over all our paperwork to really show that the tax breaks that we're using are for what they're intended? It's in the system already. I agree the system needs to be simplified. My own view, I know we're moving on to the NHS, but on tax, the other area where I think we can generate a lot more money fairly is by closing some of the reliefs and exemptions in capital gains tax and the difference between income tax and dividend tax and so on, in our domestic tax arrangements, and pensions tax relief, which only benefit the very wealthiest. And that's another way in which we would more fairly, certainly than the Conservatives, seek to finish balancing the books, but generate money, back to the original question from Reggie, for our nurseries and our colleges and schools.
And for the
NHS.
Time. So it's really,
and for the NHS.
I infer from what you're saying, it's it's HM, what do they call it? RC. No need to use language like that. I'm doing my best, for goodness sake. It's really step up to the plate for them and a concerted effort. NHS, let me see now. Who haven't we heard from? The guy at the back right in the middle with the bluish shirt. What's your name?
Oh, Kostakis.
Kostakis, how are you?
I used to work for the NHS, so what cuts will you make to fund NHS pay rises? Because you've said that you're actually going to give them an increase, which we haven't had for a long time.
So on pay in the NHS and indeed in the public sector as a whole, what I'm saying, which seems to me to be only fair, is that over the last 5 years, 5.5 million public sector workers, many of them in the NHS, doctors, nurses and so on, have had real, in some cases, significant real terms cuts to their take-home pay. In total, public sector workers have contributed about £12 billion through that prolonged restraint on their pay increases to balancing the books. And I think we're now tantalisingly close to balancing the books. We're within 2 or 3 years of doing so, and I believe we can do so without prolonging public sector pay restraint. What that means is that for the remaining 2 years, Kostakis, that we still have to make savings to balance the books, we would make sure that public sector pay moves at least in line with prices, so it's not, you don't have these real terms cuts you've had in the past. And then once we balance the books in 2017-18, you'd make sure that the pay review bodies that, as you know, make recommendations on public sector pay, ensure that pay goes up by well above the increase in prices. I think we can do that whilst actually taking a number of the other measures we've just discussed on closing tax loopholes, evasion, avoidance, increasing taxes
quick one from David.
Only on those
Are you
very
David
wealthiest to balance the books
I knew you
instead.
got a question on the NHS. David,
Can I come back?
Quick one on that. Is the actual NHS too big to fail? In other words, should there not be a cross-party solution to the problems of the NHS? Not the £2.5 billion that Labour are saying, not the 8 the Conservative, but the medium and long-term solution to the problem has to be cross-party, not being used as a political football.
Can I add something? Because hugely controversial was Andrew Lansley's Health and Social Care Act, which after David Cameron had said there will be no more top-down reorganisation. Now, it was a weighty document. When you got it and read it before it went through, did you phone David Cameron and say, what the heck?
No, so when Andrew Lansley sent to me the original version, as you may remember, sort of this goes slightly back in the mists of time, but I insisted that we pause the whole thing.
I remember that, It went through as it is, there were changes.
No, there were huge changes. There were huge changes about it. They're not little cosmetic changes. I'll give you one specific example of a change.
But there's huge disquiet about it still.
There's disquiet. I think, but personally, if you must know, I think the allegation from the Labour Party that the Andrew Lansley bill is leading to privatising the NHS is simply wrong. It is a total and utter fib. I mean, I'll give you the statistics. Under Labour, the total amount of NHS money that went to the private sector was just over 4% of the total. It's now around 6%. So, it's just simply not the case. That
It's not heading in that direction.
No. Can I tell you this? Can I tell you the purpose of those reforms? And it is this: we have a challenge as a country, which, by the way, every developed nation does, which is a good one in a way, which is we're all living much longer. But it means that we have an NHS or NHS hospitals which were designed for a population that no longer exists, and we now have an increasingly large number of elderly folk in hospital beds for long periods of time, then not being properly discharged back into the community or into their home. And what we need to do is make sure that we keep people healthier, particularly elderly men and women with long-term ageing conditions. We keep them healthy in their home and in their community rather than just decant them into hospital. Okay. That, in a nutshell, is what that bill was trying to address.
And you're taking the politics out of the NHS.
Yeah, that would be a good thing.
Who thinks that's possible? Who would like that to happen? The politics to be taken out of the NHS? A lot of hands going up. Nick, did your hand go up there? Yeah. Do you think it's ever going to be possible? Because we heard a political answer from the Deputy Prime Minister, as we would from any politician in any party. Can it ever happen? Is it dreamland?
I think it is dreamland, yeah. I don't think there's too many people have got too many irons in the fire with regards to what they want to do with the NHS.
Frank?
Yeah, it's such a big organisation. I mean, it takes 4 or 5 years to train nurses. How can you have governments lurching every 5 years talking about an organisation that probably needs decades of planning ahead to succeed?
Jane?
Stop changing it. Leave the NHS to run itself, which is what used to happen before things like targets were introduced.
But are targets good?
No, because you reduce the people to a number.
Anyone else?
People are people. So some people need 5 minutes, some people need 50 minutes.
Yeah.
Give people what they need and treat them properly.
I think in your manifesto you talk about GPs, don't you?
Yeah, but Jane, can I just pick you up one thing?
Yes.
I think there are actually some targets and sort of constraints on the NHS which are a good thing. Let me give you an example. I've introduced, or the government's introduced, but because of something I insisted on, as of this month, new access and waiting time standards in mental health, which have never existed before, right? So now, if you suffer from depression or you have an episode of psychosis, let's say if you have an episode of psychosis, I'm not suggesting you might, Jane, but if you did...
Many people do.
Exactly, and we shouldn't be... Exactly, we should lift the stigma around this. If you did, you will now, because of a change we've introduced, the NHS will have to see you within 2 weeks, just as much as if you were initially... suspected of having cancer. We've had these access and waiting time standards and targets in physical health for a very long time. It was a good thing, by the way, that the previous Labour government introduced. I now want to introduce them for mental health. I think that's a target that does make sense.
Yes, I quite agree with you. I do actually suffer from depression.
All right. Well, actually, if you...
And I think it's a very good idea to see people. And to be honest with you, though, if somebody has an episode of psychosis, I'd say see them in 24 hours.
And Jane, there's a key thing here, isn't there? Because people who suffer from depression need very specific treatment, and there isn't a one-drug situation.
No,
and if you're only getting 10 minutes with your GP, he's not going to be able to properly diagnose it. That's a huge issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very lucky with my GP, and she's been incredibly supportive with me. The last 12 months have been very, very difficult for me. But she's been great. I go to, obviously I have regular appointments at the moment, but sometimes I'm in there 20 minutes and she doesn't stint that time, and she's just there for me. So in that respect I'm lucky. And I've also, in Kensington, probably makes it a good thing. I've got very good support. We've got Depression Alliance, which is a fantastic charity.
Do you use talking therapies?
Talking therapies, antidepressants, but just getting out with people who suffer something similar and being a normal human being and being accepted for that is very important.
Well, one in 4 people in our country
45 seconds, everyone.
Some point suffer from mental health. So I think it's... And look, we're only at the foothills of the great change we need to make, but I think it's a really good thing that slowly but surely society is much more open about mental health in a way that we always have been about physical health.
Thank you all very much. One word answer. Who's going to be the next Prime Minister?
That's for you to decide, not me.
Listen, show your appreciation for each other and for the Deputy Prime Minister and for our listeners at home. Thank you very much indeed. Well done. Some great questions. Thank you very much to Nick Clegg. Friday Takeover continues all day on 5 Live. Next week we'll be in Salford on Friday Takeover talking to the Shadow Health Secretary Andy Burnham. A few more questions on the NHS then. Have a great weekend.